All right, let's go ahead and get going with our webinar today. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar put on by TimeSolv. My name is Scott Clasen. I'm the Director of Marketing at TimeSolv. And today we're going to talk legal tech, where to spend your money and how to leverage your technology during this COVID-19 situation that we're all in. So I first want to introduce the guest we have with us. Dennis Kennedy, as you can see, is the other gentleman with us. He is a well-known legal tech and innovation advisor. He's an adjunct law professor, professional speaker, author, podcaster, jack of all trades. But he really has a unique ability to communicate complex technological and legal issues in ways that non-experts like myself can easily understand. He currently teaches a course on entrepreneurial lawyering at Michigan State University after retiring as Vice President Senior Counsel at MasterCard's Digital Payments and Labs Group. He also was an early adopter in the nascent days of the internet, building a law firm website in 1995, maybe one of the very first law firm sites that was ever out there, and started blogging long before it was cool in 2003. So he's an award-winning author. He's written numerous books, hundreds of articles and columns on how technology impacts the legal profession. And you'll often see him presenting at legal conferences around the country. And you can hear him regularly on his popular podcast, which is available on the Legal Talk Network. It is the Kennedy Mile Report with Tom Mile. So Dennis, thank you very much for joining me here today. Appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad we spoke about on the podcast about this topic, and so it was great when you reached out to me because I thought it was a great topic for this time, and it certainly reflects where I think a lot of the thinking that your customers and the other people who have called in are at is like, what are the kind of simple things I need to be doing now to be effective in what I do with technology, both right now as triage and then moving forward as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you know, our customers. I mean, for those that are joining us that aren't you know, interacting with TimeSolv as a customer, give you a quick little background on us before we kind of jump in. We are time and billing software, web-based, been around for over 20 years now, working with law firms to help them be more efficient in how they do their time and billing and get paid faster. And I've met Dennis, I've known Dennis for several years now. I've seen him at many conferences and knew that he would be the right person to talk about on this subject. So today's webinar, kind of the format of what we want to cover today, this isn't going to be a typical webinar with a number of like, you know, supporting slides or PowerPoint or anything in that area. You're going to have to look at the two of us during this situation, but it's okay. I put on my nice sweatpants today, so as we are all you know, working from home. So before Dennis, we start talking about specifically some things that law firms should be thinking about when it comes to spending in the tech arena. Let's kind of get ourselves up to around 30,000 feet and talk a little bit about the state of the legal industry related to technology. I've seen some things since this all kind of went down about a month or so ago that we have gotten to legal judgment day, where law firms that, you know, the legal industry is sort of known as being somewhat technology laggards, and that, you know, they have finally met the day where they have to move themselves into the 21st century solutions to make them efficient and really sometimes be able to just practice law like they knew how to practice it when they were in an office a month ago. Do you think, is it that drastic of a, hey, this really is the come to Jesus, for lack of a better term, time for law firms, or is that kind of overstating the situation?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be a gigantic change. And, you know, whether it's a kind of pull off the Band-Aid or something that continues to go on, say, for a year and a half, I think we're going to see, I think actually April, by the end of April, early May, we're really going to see the impact. And I've been thinking about this because I saw all these big law firms, you also see it in the mid-sized firms as well, announcing very quickly layoffs, furloughs, salary reductions, canceling summer programs, canceling offers to law students. Like the law students I teach, have all basically had their job offers wiped out, except for maybe a couple, and those are the to the way I hear them described, they really haven't been told anything definitive yet by their firm. So they're in a tough spot. And so I thought that was like a really fast reaction and it surprised me. But then I was thinking about the way that law firm partnerships are set up. And you kind of think about this, you go like, in January, when I was at a law firm, we all got our distributions. You essentially emptied everything out of the firm. And then because you geared up for collections at the end of the year, everybody kind of took a breath. And so your collections weren't that great. Even your billings weren't that great in the first couple of months of the year.
Hmm.
So now this hit right at the time when you needed to have cash start coming in. And so it'll be interesting. And so that's why I think people took the preventive actions really quickly because potentially there's some cash crunches out there. And then we also have it, that why I say April and May are going to be interesting is because we don't know yet how our clients are going to be paying bills. Like a lot of work has been, canceled or postponed in a number of areas other than law. Like I know people in the consulting world, which is sort of where I live in these days, but a lot of my friends just had all their projects basically canceled. And then I've seen some surveys where clients have said that paying their legal bills is like almost at the bottom of their priority list. So if you're just trying to keep people employed, keep the business going, trying to survive, then you're probably not going to pay your law firm, or you're only going to pay a fraction, but you're certainly going to try to slow pay. So I think that's putting a lot of pressure on. And then as we adapt to what we're going to do, with completely different methods of work. And I don't know that many law firms have been hit yet with actual illness, right? Illness and
Right,
death.
right.
And that's a wild card. And whether we're kind of over the hump, whether we're over the hump and ready to start an even bigger wave, nobody knows at this point, and how long it's going to go. So I think it's really tricky, but I think what's going to happen is you feel a bit closer to me, I think, to the survival mode. So some law firms have gotten the PPP to help do payroll and stuff. Others haven't. But I think unless you get cash coming in or ways to pay people, it's going to be super difficult to keep things going.
Well, then let's talk about, okay, those difficult decisions if cash isn't coming in, and kind of get into talking about where the smart spend, because even if cash isn't coming in, if you're still running a business, there's no way around it. You have to spend some money on tools to do your work. So let's talk about kind of how firms can go about analyzing their tech spend. I think you've kind of identified 3 or 4 sort of main channels, or break it down into 3 or 4 different categories that firms should be looking at when they're determining what can we keep, what shouldn't we keep, and so on. So let's start there.
Yeah, so I like to think in terms of what can we cut, what can we freeze, what should we keep investing in or invest more in, and then what are we overlooking that we already have, and then I'm glad that, as we all know, the tax return day has been put off for a while, so it's not as unpleasant to use the word audit right now as it usually is in April. But
Right.
but I do think part of it is just kind of saying, okay, let's step back and look at what it is that we have, so we can actually use some data and understand what it is that we have, look at it all with a clear, with kind of a clear head, and a sharp pencil, and say, what makes sense. And then I think you can start to think a bit more clearly about this. So if you look at, the traditional surveys that are done of the legal profession, you generally see that there's a number around 4% of a firm's costs will go to technology. So
Okay.
that could be 2, it could be 5, and it will depend from year to year. But 4 is a good good rule of thumb. So I like to look at that, and I think that gives you some like a reasonable approach to technology. So let's say that my costs of running my firm are $500,000 to make it easy, to make the math easy. Then I say, if then I need to look at my technology spend in comparison to that $20,000. That will at least give me a rule of, some kind of assessment. And it also helps me point out that that unfortunately, right, that I could cut the whole technology budget and it won't do as much as laying off one person,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so I think that can kind of help to say, okay, let's and that's where I go into the different, kind of buckets of technology where you can say, okay, given what it is, let's let's be smart about this, and maybe the savings we can do there, which I think is really important, help us keep somebody employed a little longer, help us do that, and then we can, as we'll talk about, we can also say, what are the technologies that help bring in revenue, that help us service our clients better, those sorts of things. But I think that sort of rule of thumb on budget uh, can be helpful. So I don't know. Do you want to start with the cutting, because it's
Yeah, I think that's probably where people gravitate to first, right? If when you're talking about those buckets, so how would you go about determining? I mean, it seems like this is the easy one, right? Of where can we decrease our spending? And I think a lot of that should be pretty self-evident. Of like, there's you always, this term is one I don't love to use, but it's apropos of like, it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Is there
yeah.
stuff that I've, technology I've invested in? First of all, how easy is it to decrease the spending? So first, I think you probably need to start looking at, what do I have, month-to-month subscription software for, and what do I maybe have I paid for that? Well, I already paid for it, so no matter what, I have it. I can't really not stop spending on it. I think you sort of need to start there with the analysis, right?
Well, I think you could start to say, what is it that I could cut? What maybe I can renegotiate some things. Maybe I can do early termination, and they actually, if there is a cost associated with that, maybe it gets waived, or it's in the long run, it's not. That's not a big deal. I just sort of look. I think you're right. You're just looking for super easy things. So if you, for some reason, have some software that you own 5 licenses for, and you really only use 2, then what's the point of paying for the other 3? No.
Right.
Uh, and then I would start to look and say, okay, what are those things that I'm paying for? I'm just flat out not using, or I was already wondering why I was paying for anyway. So those to me uh, tend to be super easy. Like I said, uh, I wouldn't waste much time on the small cuts as really going after the big ones, like the 80/20 rule, right? If I could,
Yeah, right,
you
right.
know, uh, and go for the big ones. And then I think it's like, when you're in the medical world, you don't want to cut the things that help you. You don't want to hurt yourself with those cuts. So I would say, um, I don't want to cut things that help me reach clients, that help me bring in cash,
Right.
that help me retain my best people. All those sorts of things. I kind of take those off the table, and I'll use one illustration for you for myself. So I bought the premium Sales Pro account in LinkedIn, which costs essentially $960 a year. And I looked at that because that's an easy $1,000 to cut off my own budget. Then I said, but I'm hoping to launch some new things, and LinkedIn's really important to me. It's like one of my main channels, and the extra features that gives me are super helpful. I think that's cutting off my nose to spite my face.
So it becomes a real
To
kind of
yeah,
ROI sort of
right,
calculation, plain and
right.
simple, right? Is that $900 spend, if that could bring in one new, consulting gig for you, it's going to more than pay for itself probably, right?
Right. And and that, and if I were looking for a job, the LinkedIn job hunter premium account is $30 a month. Well, that's not a lot of money if you're out in this difficult job market. So Uh, so I look at those things, whereas to say, there are some, and this kind of moves over to the freeze as well, but there are some things that you had planned that those are going to be easy cuts, right? Because you haven't spent the money yet. Um, so you say, I was planning to buy this and I was planning to do this. Maybe I roll that back a little bit or I trade out. And it could be one of those things, my wife will sometimes say to me, yeah, if you're going to get one of these things, then one of the things you already have has to leave
Has
the house.
I
And
think
so,
your wife's
so,
been talking to my wife, right?
so maybe you do that. And then, you know, my daughter is like big on selling old technology and stuff. So that's something you would never think about. But if
No, you're right, and that's an
you're picking
underrated
up like
thing.
$100 here, $100 there, it's real money.
Yeah, I think that's an underrated element of if you are decreasing spending, especially if it's in physical hardware, that you can recoup some costs. It's worth the time to look into that, where a lot of people maybe wouldn't have thought about that. They just take it to the recycling center. But again, this is probably a good market where people are more interested in buying, used or recycled equipment. I think you said something I think is important, and I think it could be really a thread through all of these kind of buckets we discussed, and that is being client focused. And all of these decisions you make on the technology you're going to freeze, cut, increase spending on, whatever the case may be, has to be with the client in mind. And how does this impact my ability to do my job for my client? And that's where maybe you can find some wiggle room, and what stuff can I get by on that doesn't impact my client. But I think it's always important to be client focused with all of this, which gets into like, what are some of the freeze spending areas that you think are easy again to look at and hold off on?
So I think the easiest one is just sort of extending the life cycle. So, and this I think, Scott, is really a benefit of moving to the cloud in a lot of ways. Because if I have that older computer, the fact that I'm using a cloud service, all I really have to worry about is my internet connection and using a browser. So I don't need to have the latest, greatest, most powerful processor. So I actually can kick out the replacement cycle for another year or two. So it could be that, say, I have a laptop and it will cost me, just pricing things today, $2,000 to get the new laptop I want. And I have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old laptop that basically does the trick for what I'm doing.
Right, right.
And so can I go another year? Can I go another 2 years? That's a $2,000 savings. So I sort of freeze that amount. And I look at other places where I say, what can I do to kind of keep things in place that make sense? So it's just like almost the freeze is kind of like a postponing of things. So you don't upgrade phones, like cell phones,
Right,
that normal
right.
sort of thing. You just kind of push them out a little bit. And then I think part of the freeze thing is that you do have the potential on some of the things to say, can I negotiate with the vendor? So like, can I negotiate with the phone service just to keep me on? Will they give me a grace period? Will they cut my monthly? Can I look at some things like that? Which to me is, I think, part of the freeze notion, because I'm keeping the technology, but almost I'm looking for some savings that um, it doesn't hurt to ask for. So I think the freeze thing can just be, to me, it's sort of take that really hard look to see what is actually important. What is it I actually use? I want to make sure I keep that. Like I said, the client piece is, how do my clients communicate with me? I definitely don't want to disrupt that. Uh, how do they pay me? I definitely don't want to disrupt that. And so I think probably the trend that you're seeing, and I'm definitely hearing about, is the law firms that haven't gone to credit card payments are definitely moving that direction. You just want
Yeah,
to make it super easy for people to pay.
yeah.
Um,
There's a couple of things as a software company that is run in web based and does work on how do lawyers get paid. We've definitely seen an uptick in interest in existing customers of ours who want to figure out I haven't normally taken credit card payments. How can I do that with your guys' tools or whatever the case may be? So I think that gets us a little bit here now to, okay, we've figured out where we can cut, we figured out where we can freeze. So there's some perhaps dollars available. So is there a pivot point of, hey, should we actually be doing some investing in our tech stack here because we're all in this completely different environment, which may call for different technology than what we've been using previously?
Yeah, so I think that I always start to, I mean, I'll go back to the client focus again, but also like how you work together with your people. So we know that if we're going to spend money, the thing that's going to make the most sense is our remote infrastructure. How is it going to be? Because it's pretty good chance that there's going to be a lot more work from home. There's a pretty good chance that our clients are going to work with us remotely in different ways than we ever did before. It's a pretty good chance that clients are going to want online meetings. And there's going to be some other things along those lines. So you see how quickly the medical profession moved to telemedicine. And so I think that will kind of become an expectation in its own way in legal. Like, why would I want to come to a lawyer's office for a meeting when we can do a Zoom call? So I think you're looking at that. And then so I kind of go, back to my main points. It's like, does it help you serve your clients better? Does it keep your clients with you? And does it help you bring in cash? I mean, just to reduce it to the most simple terms. And then I always think of technology, and it really makes sense to me, especially in this environment, is a portfolio approach, right? So in our investments, we know that we have sort of long-term assets. We have higher risk, we have lower risk, we have, short-term, medium-term, long-term. And we also know that the place we want to be is that we want a diversified portfolio. So it's going to be, we all have our own risk tolerance, obviously. So my portfolio would look different than yours. But you could say, hey, if all I'm thinking about is cutting and freezing, it's like I'm just buying, like the safest, lowest paying interest, bonds I can get because they're safe.
Right.
And if the economy roars back or whatever, you're going to have inflation, and that's going to be the stupidest investment that you could make. It's going to turn out to be the riskiest thing you could have done. So I think you start to say, can I kind of almost do what the mutual fund companies do, say that there's this 3x3 grid, and I look at my technology and I kind of plot them in these different boxes. And I don't need to get into the highest risk, highest return, but I need to make sure that I have some diversity that probably in these days fits within a conservative kind of approach. So, but you're definitely going to have some things that are sort of medium term, medium risk, that sort of thing. And I think that can be really helpful in investing. And I do think that kind of, like I said, to me, that kind of drives you to things that are going to help you get new clients and help your existing clients work with you. And then I think it's always been the case, right? That our best new business comes from our existing clients. So,
Right. Yeah.
so
100% true.
so that's how I would look at that. And that's where, again, that's where I think in all of these factors, if I were to pick one thing I'm really confident about is there's just going to be, and I look at the stats every year from the ABA technology survey of lawyers. I have no doubt that the cloud usage by lawyers is going to go up significantly next, for this year and the following years.
So let's talk about then and kind of pivot towards, okay, you've cut, you've frozen, you've maybe decided there are some other investments that can be made. So how can I think that fourth bucket we identified was better use of our existing technology or the new technology we may have invested in. I think this maybe more than any other could be the most important takeaway from today is, are we using our existing technology to its maximum capability?
Yeah, so I think that's, I really do agree with you. So generally what people say is that in any given software that we use, we're probably using about 10% of the features. Like the normal user is doing that. It's over the years, I've had so many people say, I wish I could do X. And you go like, well, you know that's already in the product, or that's in the
Yeah,
new
we get
version.
calls like that all the time, or people who maybe want to terminate with TimeSolve. Because they're like, well, I wish you guys, I'm terminating because you don't do X, Y, Z, and we have to, we'll tell them, of course, well, you can, you
Uh-huh.
just, didn't know. And it's actually, it was the genesis of, I've been with TimeSolve now for 4 years, and it was about, 3 years and 9 months ago that I quickly determined, like, we need to make sure we're educating our existing client base on all of our features, not just like new features, but old features that we shouldn't assume they remember what they're, how, that they're there. So we started sending out just a tip of the week email once a week, which is like, here's some things you may not have known about TimeSolve. And then off of that, I eventually started doing a once a month webinar. I call it the Wednesday webinar, second Wednesday of every month for our TimeSolve. In fact, I know there's some people on this webinar right now who join me every month, and just, I'll show them, yes, some new things about it, but then we get into things you may have been trained on it. And of course, we as the people, when we onboard them, you train them, you think, well, I showed them how to do it, so now they know how to do it. It's like, that's great, but it's like muscle memory. If you don't, it's like great, but like 6 months later, when you're trying to remember, like, how do I do that thing again? That sort of thing. So it's, I think, hugely important. And every software company out there, I think if I can speak for every software company in existence, we want to hear questions of like, can you do this? And we'd love to be able to have the answer. Yes, let us show you how you can do this. And I think that's a real key in these times, especially. I'll use a good example of, and this gets into a little bit of like, are you being efficient? Not just knowing the features, but are you being efficient with those features? I mean, it's no secret, a lot of lawyers, even lawyers that use TimeSolve, they don't enter their time themselves in our system. We try to make it as easy as possible to create time entries, expense entries. I even call it the 10-second time entry challenge, where you can make a time entry fully dictated out using our abbreviations and other tools in 10 seconds. But we know that a lot of attorneys still will create a time entry in an Excel spreadsheet, send it to the billing manager, who then will make the time entries in TimeSolve. It's like, well, that's not an efficient use of the tool. And now it's maybe a little bit more challenging to do that in our work environment. So let's be more efficient in how we're using what we already have.
Yeah, and although this webinar obviously is free, this tip I'm going to give you is just totally going to pay for your investment, which is that a lot of the providers that you're using, the vendors of the tools you're using, are they have their own issues about keeping people busy, and so they would like to train you more. You need more training. It's like the perfect storm, because you're probably, if you ask, you're going to get all kinds of free training.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there are also tons of people offering webinars now. And so although I would normally say a great investment is always going to be training, it's like almost like too easy right now, because I think there's just going to be tons of free training that would be available just for the asking, and you're going to find these new features. So let me use one example that I don't know how many people are using, but I'm guessing like a fair number, which is Office 365, or now
Right.
they're calling it Microsoft 365 as of 2 days ago.
Oh, I didn't even
Um,
know that. Okay.
so you're basically paying. So if I wanted to get myself, just me, the Office 365 business account, that's going to give me like all the Microsoft Office products. It's going to give me Teams. It's going to give me an Exchange server, some other features that they have. Um, and it's going to cost me, I think when I priced it last, it was $9.95 a month per user. Okay, so you're saying, oh, I don't, how am I, how am I going to figure out Zoom and all these other platforms and stuff? And I have all these things. You're like, uh, isn't it simple just to commit to like the Microsoft environment? You're going to have everything. It should be reliable, should be
Yeah.
updated. I don't have concerns at this point of Microsoft going out of business. So you'd say, here, this takes over the long haul, I know I'm spreading out my technology costs. I'm on a common flat platform. I'm not going to be too worried about incompatibilities. It may take some training and it will be updated. And then in that environment, there's going to be these, tons of features. Because if you already had Office 365, you'd say, well, I guess I did have Teams. I didn't know what it was. You go like,
Exactly.
well,
I think a lot of firms or a lot of
it's
people
the
have
platform.
discovered Teams for the
Yeah.
first time as a communication tool. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the other kind of staying in that same thread of your existing tech, technology stack and being efficient with it. This is where there's the hidden efficiency you have to find in, especially if you're not cloud-based. Let's assume you're still accessing a client server type, and you're like, hey, our tech people set up a VPN, environment, and I can get to my technology, so it's okay. I can get to my software. But I encourage people to look at how efficient are they in using that. We took a phone call from a firm that was using time slips. She was frustrated because even though she could get into time slips, because of the way the VPN was set up and her internet connection and so on, it was really slow. I mean, painfully slow. So slow to the point she was calling us for a different solution to that. So it's like, it's one thing to, I'm going to use my existing tech, or I know it can work from home, but can it work from home as efficiently as it's set up to be? Which kind of also, to me, gets into talking a little bit about the process change that has to happen potentially with our new environment. And again, you talked about already, like getting paid. There's still a lot of law firms that will print and mail invoices, for example. And that's how they have some people, mail the checks back in. It's rather traditional. And in our world, the technology world I live in, it's like, how can you still be doing that? Well, frankly, a lot of firms do. And to the point where we had a call early on in the pandemic sort of setup where a woman was like, we use TimeSolv, but she goes, I don't know if I have enough paper and ink in my printer at home to print all of these invoices I have to print. What can I do? And of course, our first answer was, well, you could email it to them, but she wasn't set up for that yet. We happen to have a service that offers, we'll mail invoices for law firms as an additional fee. But it's the whole, I think, concept of, you have the time for the training, you have the time for, it's like, it's a time to think about, is my process the right process? Whether it's the time entry, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's the way you get your invoices, and I'm speaking of my world, of course, with TimeSolv, but it's the whole idea of like, if we're not going to look at how we do things now, and I know the legal world is all about precedent, right? I mean, that's what the foundation of the law system is based on precedent. So that oftentimes extends for law firms beyond just the law, but to how they run their business. Well, this is how we've always run a legal firm. And if now's not the time to reconsider those foundations, there never will be, I think, because, who knows when normal or what normal is going to look like for us in the next, I'm not just talking about a couple of months, but 18 months from now, 2 years from now. And the idea of people are going to realize maybe we don't have to do as much in-person stuff to really still stay efficient. And if our process doesn't shift with that, this is a long-term play now that you have to consider, not just the stopgap Band-Aid, how am I going to get through the next 6 weeks type of mentality.
Yeah, because I think early on even in pre-quarantine era, I was talking to people and I said, so what happens if we were in a quarantine situation? And this hadn't happened yet. We're in a quarantine situation. You have somebody who needs to go into the office every day to get the mail, to get the paper checks, take them to the bank. What happens if the banks aren't open to customers? That will never, right. And so all the things we didn't think were going to happen have kind of happened. So I think there you can look at some of those processes and how you rely. So when I worked at MasterCard, I worked with some project managers, and they always were talking to me about, as a lawyer, they wanted to avoid a situation where I was the single point of failure. And so you look at this thing and you say, wow, our whole, like, the fact that money even gets into the bank account depends on one person, you know, who maybe has a long commute, uh,
Right.
who if they get sick, we don't have a backup for that. So you have that, and then the other thing, which I think you talked about, is you may look at like, hey, we get a new client, and then in this work from home setup, you go, well, look at what our system is. Like we fill out a paper form, and then somebody enters it into this system, then somebody else enters it into that system, and then somebody enters it, and you're like, well, wait, this is crazy. This is now that we're looking at this, we see how crazy it is, and there clearly are going to be solutions where you say, you know, enter the data once, use it many times, and which is the whole promise
Everybody
of
should be living
commuting.
by
Yeah.
that mantra, right? I mean, it should have been living with it for a long time. And by the way, I don't know if anybody's hearing in the background, my son is actually practicing piano right now upstairs in our house, my 15-year-old son. So I'm not sure if it's coming through. I can hear it, but I'm not sure if the microphone's picking it up. So if anybody's feeling like they're being serenaded here with piano, that's where it's coming from. So
Well,
sorry
that's
about
what we
that.
like. That's what we like about online meetings, are all these, the surprise things, people's pets and kids.
Well, I think that's actually, I didn't mean to have this be a segue, but I think it is a good segue to talk about using those technology tools you have for that. There's a homework culture now that we are figuring it out. And I think you came up with this term, how to de-distance, your business. And this is where TimeSolv, I think we are uniquely positioned to speak as authorities on this, because some of you may have been on my webinar that I did a couple of weeks ago, that we are and have been a virtual company since 2006. We all work from our home offices all the time. So there's a lot we can offer to firms in figuring out, like, how can we just not just survive this, but thrive in this environment. So I want to speak a little bit about what we do as a company at TimeSolv to make that happen. I think first and most importantly, it's the idea of setting expectations. Everyone is very clear about what the daily expectations are and how you're going to interact with other members of your team. In our environment, we do it with daily, what we call Scrum meetings, which is a software development kind of term, if anybody's ever done, Scrum Master work or know what that's about. But it's the idea of just in the real world of doing it, you're supposed to be standing meetings. Everyone stands. They actually don't go into a meeting and sit down, but it's a 15-minute standing meeting where you essentially go around the room and figure out, like, what are your main obstacles, what are your tasks for the day, and who do you need help from. We do it every morning at 8 a.m. with our sales team. And then I also do it with my marketing team that I have at 10 a.m. every morning. Those are important for two reasons, not just to kind of like set the kind of agenda for the day, if you will, but from a social point of view, that is our water cooler talk. That is where we catch up on what the latest thing is on Netflix. That's when we talk about Tiger King, and that's when we, have that social that we all need. And we don't do it as video calls. So, and again, I know there's been a lot of back and forth, do you need to do video calls all the time? Do you not? We have always been set up to not do them as video calls. Part of it is, I don't necessarily feel like looking decent at 8 a.m. I might still be wearing, the not nice sweatpants for the day, right? And for all the females out there, there's an uncomfortableness of having to feel like they need to be made up for a video call that they don't want to do. So I don't think there should be the pressure or the expectation that it has to be a video call. And we've certainly been totally hugely successful without having to make it, on screen with a webcam every time. So I think you really should be setting an expectation that your team, however big your team is, has a meeting once a day at some point in the day. And I think it's great to do it at the beginning of the day, because that really sets, again, the tone of the day. It gets everybody connected. Sometimes it goes 15 minutes, sometimes it goes 45 minutes, depending on what we need to talk about and depending on people's meeting schedules after that. But I think that's an important thing to make sure that it's every day. And if somebody isn't on the call, it's always like, where are you type of expectation. The other thing that we have found important is figuring out the right communication method when you're speaking with people, or not by speaking, I mean really just communicating. It doesn't always have to be a call. This is where Teams really comes into play, of doing those chats. And I think, Dennis, you brought this up. You can sort of do a chat like that on your own. It doesn't have to be, it's asynchronous, right? You can if somebody pings you about something, it doesn't mean you have to reply to them right away, nor is there necessarily an expectation you're going to reply to them right away. And you can even have a running non-work dialogue that may have happened, in your normal work environment, might have taken place in 10 minutes, but maybe it takes, 6 hours in this new environment, but you can still have that using that communication tool. I don't know, Dennis, I don't know, you've obviously worked from home as well for a long
Yeah, I've
period of
worked from
time.
home, and then also at MasterCard, being a global company, I work with people around the world, so it's in some ways is very similar to working from home. But yeah, I think there are a number of things. And when I was initially reluctant to use instant messages because I thought people would be pinging me all the time, and there would be this expectation I had to get right back to them, and it would just be terrible. But that's not the expectation. And if you look at your kids and young users of texting, that's not how they do it. So, and it serves different purposes. I would say the most common text I sent while I was at MasterCard was, when would you have time for a call?
Yeah,
And I would also say about X, because I sort of grew to hate over time the people calling you out of the blue, interrupting what you're doing, asking you a really difficult question about something you hadn't looked at or thought about for a couple of weeks or a month. Where if they would have said, "Hey, I have some questions about the X project. Do you have some time available this afternoon?" Then I could say, even if I was free right then, I would go, "Yeah, what about 4 o'clock?" And that would give me
right.
time to refresh my memory, and that can make a big difference. I'm also hearing about people with your stand-up calls. One thing I like about that is it gets everybody on the same page on priority. Because
Yes.
as a partner in a firm, you sometimes say, "Well, I gave this work to my associate, and I'm not hearing anything from them," and they think that something else is your priority, and you have that, and you just don't communicate, even in person. But that morning quick meeting can say, you can kind of adjust to say, "Oh, here's the big thing." And then the other, I hear other employers doing this and being super transparent, about saying, "Okay, here's what we need to do this week or this month to keep the doors open, and here's what we're expecting from you. And if we don't get there, and we hope we get there, but if we don't get there, then everybody understands, what we're going to do. We're going to try to put off that day of reckoning as long as possible because we're in this together." And that's if you're freezing the budget on technology or making cuts. If you're saying, "Here's the reason we're doing that, and by doing that, that buys us another month or whatever. Here's why we need to collect, and that will buy us another three
Yeah,
months."
right, right.
Then everybody feels they're part of the team, and they're not going to leave at the first chance they get, which is obviously going to become a big problem soon. That people will leave places if they find something even close to being better.
Yeah, and I think that comes back, that kind of transparency is even more important in this environment than previously when you were in an office together. And it wraps around, I think there's a couple of things you mentioned that's important for us, and that is making sure everything becomes task-based, I think. And if you haven't adopted that sort of strategy of understanding, like, I got to get these 2 to 3 main tasks done today, and then break it down into the smaller chunks of time it takes to accomplish them. And then KPIs, key performance indicators, of what has to get done this week for us to stay afloat, kind of thing. And you all know you're pulling in the same direction, that having like real numbers and real tasks, laid out there where everyone can see, is super helpful. I want to talk a little bit too about some of the challenges TimeSolv has faced, and the obstacles that I've at least recognized as a work from home person. Not just, I also worked from home when my son playing the piano was a toddler, a baby, and had worked from home with him bouncing on my knee. The biggest thing I've seen with us at TimeSolv is it's hard to you don't get that creative energy that you get when you are with other people physically. And I use this example several times. I even used it in the last webinar, where I know in my previous jobs, you might pass somebody in the hallway on a Monday morning, "How was your weekend?" is just a, that simple conversation. You stop, you both have your cup of coffee, and 10 minutes later, some really amazing idea or problem was solved, that just because the thread of that conversation ended up where it ended up organically. You don't get that organic energy in our environment that we're talking about here. Every communication you have with your coworkers now is forced. You're typing a message, you're asking if, can you make a call, are you available? So it's a stilted, non-organic, non-energetic way of interacting. And you have to, I don't have the right answer on how you overcome that necessarily. I think you just need to be aware of it at least. So I think sometimes it's good when you've had a conversation with somebody and you've solved the problem that you're trying to solve, then it's kind of like you stop, and before you're like, okay, well, I got to go now, is, hey, so how's the rest of your day going? And, and then like, or how's it going with so-and-so, your daughter at home? Get a little bit of that personal stuff going again. And then some creative things. And they're like, oh, I just got off the phone with a client that XYZ. And then you can get some of that energy again. So I think being cognizant of that, while at the same time, I've also found it sometimes it's hard to get off the phone because there's that, maybe it's a Minnesota thing where I am, it's that long goodbye of, not being able to say, okay, I need to get off the phone now and get back to what I was doing, because the chit chat is, sometimes you end up talking in a circle and you start saying the same things that you said before, and you have to kind of like, whereas in a regular work environment, if somebody was leaning up against a door frame or leaning over a cubicle, it would have been like, all right, well, hey, catch you later. And they would have been naturally out the door. So that way you interact socially, you just got to be aware of that. And that gets into the idea that oftentimes when you are on the phone, if you're not doing a video call like this, or even with a video call, you don't get that body language as much. And we all know, I don't know what the statistics are of what percent of our communication is nonverbal, that sort of thing. But it is a certain percent, right? That how we interact with people. I can tell Dennis is like liking what I'm saying because his head's going up and down. If he's on in a video call, I just feel like I'm talking to my screen, right? Or talking to my window. So again, being aware of that limited body language, it can lead to some miscommunication at times. So again, be aware of that, recognize it, talk about it. I don't necessarily, like I said, have the right answer, but you have to make sure that everyone is aware of that.
Yeah, just a couple things that you sparked for me based on my experience. So one, I actually think in some of these channels that it really helps the introverts,
Yes.
so that if you have the regular 15-minute meeting, then gradually they become more comfortable sharing their ideas just because they're more used to it. I think that you have people who don't like to speak up, and like you said, people just don't like to be on video. But if you put it in Slack or Teams or something like that, uh, they're much more. I use aggressive in the best sense of the words. That they're more willing to put out their opinions and stuff in that environment. So sometimes having a number of different channels can help. So that can be super interesting, that dynamic. There's also this thing that not enough people do, which is scheduling your meetings at like 10 minutes after the hour. So that your meeting starts and it's, like you're in school and there's like, the time to get between classes. But then that way, like people are always coming late because they're just getting off another call. But if you schedule it at 10 after, then you don't default to either a 30-minute or a 60-minute call. It's a 20 or a 50, and you give people time so everybody actually shows up on time, so you don't waste that. And the other drawback that I hear a lot about, and I've experienced myself a lot, is that how do you get separation from work and home? And the big one is, obviously if you're taking care of kids and stuff like that, then you're in a whole different realm. But the big one that people find is they can't stop working. Like it becomes really impossible to stop. And so I think, a couple summers I, worked in a factory, and, there was basically, things ended. And I think there was a bell.
Sliding down the dinosaur tail, like Fred Flintstone,
something
right?
like that. But it's almost like you just want to set a timer that says, okay, at 5 o'clock or, whatever. And sometimes you're way more productive at home anyway, so you can work, a shorter day. But you just say, okay, whatever the time is, there's something that's going to notify me, and I'm going to condition myself, which usually takes 21 days to get a new habit. But by hearing that bell, I hear that bell and I go, "Oh, time to stop work, put it down," and then I physically move from one room to another, and that's the end of my day.
So and it's a really good point, Dennis. And there's one other thing I learned early on in working from home full time that I think is not discussed enough, and that is that transition time between work and home. Most of us we're used to a commute, right? Whether it's a 10-minute commute or 25-minute commute, it's that decompression time that you have where it was a jolt to my system where I would get done with work and literally walk out of the office, and now I'm at home, and it's like it's home, it's what's for dinner, what. So you do need to kind of, I think, build in a little bit of transition time. I've learned where when my work gets done at 5, I absolutely agree you should have a set time where you stop, and I actually shut down the computer and try not to walk into that office the whole rest of the evening. But I will spend like that last 10 minutes doing non-work related things on I might, that's where I'm checking social media, I'm reading, a sports article, whatever. I'm just doing something non-work related, but I'm not quite at home yet. It's that buffer gap that I bet a lot of people on here would be like, yeah, I couldn't place my finger on it, but it's just been weird how I transitioned from work to home mentality. You need that. And whether it was listening to sports radio on the way home or music or a podcast or whatever, we all had that on a train or whatever. Now you don't have that anymore. So let's take the last couple of minutes to see if anybody has questions. Somebody did have a question early on about specific software. This webinar wasn't about these are the right tools, these are the wrong tools, but they did ask us about if we had any thoughts on dragon legal dictation as potentially an investment tool to help. And I think you could probably speak on that better than I could.
Yeah. So when I talk about the speech recognition tools, I go back, many years ago to my brother-in-law, who was a lawyer in California, and he looked into using Dragon back then, which was not nearly as good as it is now. And he was just starting. He had started as a lawyer. He was doing his own firm, and he was just in a panic over California. We used the term secretary in those days. I will tell you how long ago it was, but what the salaries and benefits were. And it was a staggering amount of money to him. Like he could not figure out, he just thought he would be opening this law practice to pay his secretary's salary. So he looked at Dragon then, and it was going to be like a $4,000 or $5,000 investment. And the way he looked at it was the equivalent of him getting like a not very good secretary. But if it got him through 9 to 12 months, when he's starting the business, it saved him probably $50,000-$60,000 that he didn't have to spend. And so I've never seen anybody look at it in quite that economical way, but that's really made sense to me. So I think the technology is better. You just got to have reasonable expectations. You kind of like if you're using any of the voice software, in a lot of ways, it's just amazing right now. But the fact is, even if you're at 95%, you're at 98%, that the 2% that it trips up over is going to irritate you. So, so I have a friend who used to speak a lot about speech recognition for lawyers. He said it's the equivalent of having a not very good secretary, and a lot of times that's okay, right? You just got to do more proofreading and stuff like that. But if you can get the stuff out of your head and onto paper, knowing that you got to keep working with it, that can be okay because you're not paying a person.
And it's again, to me, that's about expectations again. If you know that going in, like, hey, this is not going to be 100%, I'm still going to have to dedicate X amount of time, then you don't feel like you're disappointed when you have to commit that time because you already were, expecting it.
Yeah, it's like the Amazon Echo. So I'm always trying to get which my wife loves, but she's always asking it questions that it can't possibly, given the way the technology is, there's like no way that it can answer, because it doesn't.
How to sell Dennis's stuff since he's bought new stuff? That type of question?
Yeah, it's like, well, you realize it's not really even recognizing words, right? It's like something else is happening there. And so it's one thing to say, what's the weather in Ann Arbor, Michigan going to be? Okay, so that's one thing, because you can see what processes that could trigger and the result it would bring back, which is what is the daily weather report, versus saying, is it going to rain today in Ann Arbor? A little bit harder. If you say, like, what's the best something or other, you're getting harder and harder,
Yeah.
what it is. And so kind of the more natural the question is that humans would be able to interpret, those can't do. So if you say with Dragon, I'm dictating, and the idea is to get stuff out of my head in a draft form into a document, it'll do it, and probably surprisingly well, and it will keep going, because a lot of us, people dictate texts and other
Right.
things now, and it does an amazing job.
We
Those
encourage people
technologies.
who are using TimeSolv on their mobile device for when doing your description for a time entry, just use the built-in microphone to dictate what your time entry description is going to be instead of having to, type it like this, like you normally do. All right, we only have a couple of minutes left here. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask Dennis about, the tech spend environment? Anything, you could ask certainly me about the working from home environment and what's worked or not worked. Would love to be able to answer any questions that people might have.
Yeah, I was going to say, Scott, one of the things that I've done over the last 2 years, and I was the chair for a while, is I've been on the board for the ABA's Legal Technology Resource Center. And so if people are looking for a good all-in-one source, I mean, there's a daily blog, there's, you know, uh, a number of resources that are, grouped by certain things you're interested in. You might be interested in software evaluations, things like that. If you're looking for that sort of one place to kind of start digging into technology, that's the place that I'd like to recommend. And not just because I've been involved in it. I just think it's kind of grown over the years to be really useful.
I'm going to type that in the chat. So it's the ABA's Legal Technology Resource Center.
Yes. And that's going to be www.lawtechnology.org.
If I could type right here while people are watching, lawtechnology.com. Just Law Technology?
Lawtechnology.org.
Sorry. All right, technology.org. Okay. Good. Well, I don't see any other questions that actually have come in now, but that's okay because we've right near to the top of the hour. So this has been recorded, and I will be sending out a link where people can rewatch this if they'd like. Certainly grateful, Dennis, that you took the time here to talk legal tech and what are some of the options here while we're living in this environment.
Yeah, this is fun. I always love talking to this, trying to figure out ways to help people. I was just thinking though, you should open the door and let your son play the outro music.
Well, he's on the trumpet. I don't know if anybody can hear it, but he plays piano and trumpet, and now he's been practicing the trumpets. I'm not sure if anybody can hear it. There it is. Yeah. All right. Well, all right. Thanks, Dennis, for having spend the time with us today. Thank you, everybody who attended this webinar. I will send out a link with the recording, and hope everyone stays safe and stays safe and healthy, and we're all kind of back into whatever our normal is going to be, but at least interacting with others hopefully sooner rather than later. So have a good rest of your day. Have a good weekend, everybody, and we will hopefully catch up soon. Thanks.
Right.